The purchase of Alaska, a visionary decision or a costly mistake? The story of the purchase of Alaska, also known as Seward's Folly, is a fascinating tale of ambition, diplomacy, and misunderstandings. In 1867, the United States acquired Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, a price many considered ridiculously low for such a vast territory. However, at the time, the purchase was mocked and criticized, as few saw the strategic or economic value of this distant, frozen corner of the world. This event, which went almost unnoticed at the time, would later become one of the greatest territorial achievements of the United States. The purchase of Alaska not only expanded U.S. territory by over 1.5 million square kilometers, but also marked the beginning of the country's projection into the North Pacific. In this script, we will explore the reasons that led Russia to part with Alaska, the diplomatic negotiations led by Secretary of State William H. Seward, and the criticisms the deal received at the time. We will also see how, years later, Alaska became one of the United States' greatest sources of natural wealth. Get ready for a journey back to the 19th century, where political and strategic decisions shaped the geography and future of North America. Chapter 1. The origins of Alaska under Russian rule in the mid-18th century. The Russian Empire turned its gaze eastward with an insatiable hunger for expansion. Under the reign of Empress Elizabeth, Russia had consolidated its power over vast regions of Siberia, but a more distant horizon began to entice its leaders: the icy waters of the North Pacific. There, an unexplored and mysterious territory promised unimaginable riches. In 1741, an expedition led by Vitus Bering, a Danish mariner in Russia's service, embarked on a journey that would change the course of history. His ship, battered by storms and relentless cold, eventually reached the southwestern shores of Alaska. What Bering and his crew found was a paradise of wildlife, with endless forests, majestic mountains, and an abundance of sea otter pelts, whose value in international markets was comparable to gold. However, the human cost of this enterprise was heartbreaking. Bering's expedition ended in tragedy when he himself died on an island that now bears his name. His crew, decimated by scurvy and hunger, left an uncertain legacy, but their discoveries captured the attention of Russian traders and colonists. In the following decades, Russia established a precarious presence in Alaska. The Russian-American Company, a state-supported corporation, monopolized the fur trade and founded settlements such as Novoarkhangelsk, present-day Sitka. However, the challenges were formidable. Vast distances, tensions with indigenous tribes like the Tlingit, and fierce competition from the British and Americans made every day in Alaska a struggle for survival. Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, reports of Alaska reached the Tsar with a mix of awe and frustration. Tsar Alexander II received news of the region's impressive resources, but also of the immense costs associated with maintaining it. The empire's treasury, already weakened by the Crimean War, could not sustain what was becoming a dangerous luxury. Could Alaska, a remote corner of the world, truly justify the sacrifices it demanded? Chapter 2. William H. Seward and the Expansionist Vision of the United States. Post-Civil War America was on the verge of monumental transformation. The devastation of the war had left deep scars but also sparked a renewed sense of ambition. Among the most visionary leaders of this new era was William H. Seward, Secretary of State under Presidents Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. Seward was a man of grand ideas, a fervent believer in territorial expansion and the global future of the United States. Seward had been fascinated by Alaska for years. In private conversations, he described the region as a hidden jewel, a vast treasure trove of natural resources waiting to be harnessed. But his interest was not limited to economics. To Seward, Alaska was a key piece on a geopolitical chessboard. With its strategic location, It could become a bastion in the Pacific, connecting the United States with Asia and safeguarding its interests in the North. However, not everyone shared his enthusiasm. In a nation still struggling to heal from the wounds of war, the idea of spending millions on a remote territory seemed absurd. Seward's opponents in Congress and the press ridiculed his plans, calling him a dreamer out of touch with reality. But Seward was undeterred. With relentless tenacity, he sought allies and built a convincing case for the purchase. Meanwhile, in Russia, Tsar Alexander II faced his own dilemma. The Crimean War had left the empire in a vulnerable position, and Alaska was an evident weak point. The distance and high defense costs made maintaining the territory impractical. In a bold move, the Tsar decided to offer Alaska to the United States. If anyone could turn that frozen wilderness into an asset, it would be the Americans. Chapter 3. The negotiation and signing of the treaty on March 30th, 1867, in a quiet room in Washington, D.C. Two men met for a historic mission. On one side was William H. Seward, with his characteristic bright eyes and boundless energy. On the other, Edouard de Stoeckl, the Russian ambassador, whose diplomatic demeanor concealed palpable urgency. Both men knew that more than just a deal was at stake. It was a gamble for the future. Negotiations were swift but intense. Seward, a master of persuasion, argued that Alaska would be a jewel in America's crown. Stoeckl, for his part, skillfully played on the fear that if the United States did not buy the territory, Russia might seek another buyer, perhaps the United Kingdom. Finally, a price of $7.2 million was agreed upon, a figure that seemed laughable for such a vast territory. The signing of the treaty was a moment fraught with emotion. Seward, with a satisfied smile, signed the document while Stoeckl watched with a mix of relief and sadness. For Russia, it marked the end of an era. For the United States, the beginning of a new adventure. However, it was not all celebration. When the news reached the public, criticism was immediate. Newspapers mocked the agreement, calling it Seward's folly. Some senators even suggested that the deal was a sham. But Seward, confident of his vision, calmly responded, "Time will be my judge." Chapter 4. Criticism and Mockery. Seward's folly. When news of Alaska's purchase reached the public, it triggered a storm of disbelief and ridicule. The country's most influential newspapers, from New York to San Francisco, spared no criticism. Sarcastic columnists described the deal as the most absurd transaction ever made, and ink-black cartoons portrayed William H. Seward in a snow-covered coat, flanked by polar bears and grinning seals. Some even dubbed the new territory Icebergia. On the streets, the public, still burdened by the costs of the Civil War, couldn't understand why the government had decided to spend $7.2 million on what they perceived as a worthless frozen wasteland. What will we do there? Raise penguins? People joked in taverns. Even Seward's allies began to distance themselves, worried about the political repercussions of his decision. Congress was no kinder. During sessions, senators openly mocked the Secretary of State. Some called him the Emperor of Snow and questioned his judgment. "Why not buy the North Pole while you're at it?" quipped one senator, drawing laughter in the chamber. The irony, sharp as a blade, cut through every attempt Seward made to explain his vision. But the mockery wasn't the only issue. There was also latent fury, a sense of betrayal. For a nation that had shed blood on its own soil, spending millions on a distant territory felt insulting. That money could have been used to rebuild the South, critics roared, while others argued that Seward had fallen into a Russian trap, negotiating like a novice instead of a statesman. Seward, however, was not a man easily intimidated. From his office in Washington, he endured each criticism like a boxer, taking blow after blow, but remaining standing. Unfazed, he convened his closest allies and repeatedly reviewed the arguments in favor of the purchase. "Alaska is not just land, it is the future," he would say with a voice filled with conviction. Yet privately, even he felt the weight of opposition. At night, in the solitude of his home, Seward would pore over maps and documents, seeking solace in the vast possibilities he envisioned for Alaska. In a particularly dark moment, his daughter Frances, his closest confidant, found him sitting in his study, staring into the fire. "What if they're right?" he whispered. But Frances, with the same determination she inherited from her father, replied, "History is not written with fear, father. It is written with boldness." These words became a beacon for Seward, reminding him that his role was not to please the crowd, but to look beyond the horizon. Despite his efforts, public humiliation persisted. During a social event in Washington, a colleague approached Seward with a champagne glass and a mocking smile. "Here's to your polar bears, Seward. I hope they're worth their weight in gold." The comment provoked laughter among the attendees, but Seward simply raised his glass and responded, "Here's to the future. Someday you'll understand." However, the resistance was not only from elites. At the margins of this story were Alaska's indigenous inhabitants, the Tlingit, Haida, Inuit, and others, whose lives were forever changed by the transaction. To them, the purchase was not a source of ridicule, but of uncertainty and fear. Their ancestral lands, which had been their home and livelihood for centuries, were now the subject of a transaction between two foreign powers. Their voices, nearly inaudible in the official narrative, echoed with questions no one in Washington was willing to answer. What will become of us? Who will decide our destiny now? As the months passed, Seward began to notice a subtle change. The ridicule, though persistent, lost some of its sting. Some began to consider the possibility that Alaska had strategic value, especially in a world where trade routes and territorial disputes were constantly evolving. Seward, true to his style, never let the criticism distract him from his vision. "We did not buy Alaska for today," he declared passionately, "but for centuries to come." That was the legacy Seward left his country, a vision that looked beyond the present, seeing a united continent and a future full of possibilities. But in 1867, under the weight of mockery and disdain, few could imagine what was to come. Seward's folly remained just that, a folly. Little did the public know that time would not only prove Seward right, but also make his detractors appear short-sighted. However, it would take decades, even a century, for Alaska's greatness to be fully revealed. Meanwhile, Seward carried himself with the dignity of a man who knew that great decisions are often misunderstood in their time, but celebrated eternally when history vindicates them. Chapter 5. The Fruits of Alaska, Resources and Strategic Importance. Decades later, Seward's vision began to materialize. In 1896, the Klondike Gold Rush brought a wave of fortune seekers, transforming Alaska into a magnet for opportunity. But the real turning point came in the 20th century, when the territory's vast reserves of oil and natural gas began to be exploited. Suddenly, Seward's icebox became a source of immeasurable wealth. During World War II, Alaska demonstrated its strategic importance. Its military bases played a crucial role in defending the Pacific, and its proximity to Asia made it a key point for projecting American power. Today, Alaska serves as a reminder of the importance of thinking beyond the immediate. From its vast landscapes to its natural resources, the territory has proven to be one of the best investments in U.S. history. Conclusion. The purchase of Alaska, initially ridiculed as a mistake, has become an example of long-term strategic vision. William H. Seward, despite criticism and mockery, was correct in his belief that the territory would hold incalculable value in the future. Alaska has not only enriched the United States with its natural resources, but also served as a cornerstone of its defense and global presence. Today, Alaska stands as a reminder of how historic decisions, even the most controversial ones, can alter the course of a nation. From its vast landscapes to its economic contributions, Alaska is a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest opportunities arise from the most unexpected places.